Courtside Conversations.
Courtside Conversations.
The Roland-Garros Tennis Podcast.
Hello and welcome to Courtside Conversations, the official Roland-Garros podcast. I'm Gigi Salmon, and together with special guests, we've been keeping you company throughout the year. We like to call it tennis with a French twist. And while the tennis season, well, it's fair to say tennis never stops. The season never seems to officially stop. With Christmas fast approaching, it's time to look back on the year that has been, and I am more than delighted to be doing this in the company of friend and colleague, esteemed sports writer, author of The Master, a bestseller about Roger Federer, and I'm sure another bestseller in the making, The Warrior, about Rafa Nadal. Chris Clarey, thank you so much for coming on the pod, and thank you so much for making the time.
Gigi, great to speak with you.
Now, I was going to ask if your year was winding down, but I imagine with a book deadline on the horizon, there's not that much rest for you.
Well, the tennis season, as you know, never stops. Neither does the football season for you. You get the double whammy there. But no, for me, it's actually, finally, I'm exhaling a bit because this has been a 2-year process. And actually, you think about it, it's been almost a 20-year process following Nadal's career and going back through all the notes and the interviews and making a whole bunch more rounds to do it again for the book. But I'm really happy to say that, it's the manuscript is done and we're in the final edits. And so it's the creative process is always the hardest part. Now we're more of in the maintenance process. So that's a lot easier. And it feels great, I got to tell you. And I'm excited about it. Yeah, it's been an emotional thing to follow Rafa's journey. And will he or won't he stop? It's been a lot of that going on for the last 2 years. I understand his vacillation, but it's my year is hopefully going to slow down just in time to have some eggnog and do it right.
What appealed to you, or what still appeals to you about writing books? I mentioned you wrote The Master about Roger Federer, and how difficult or easy have you found it?
Well, Gigi, actually, this is still pretty new to me. I mean, I was a daily print journalist for almost 40 years, working for the International Herald Tribune and the New York Times, and every day was a story to write, and every day was an adrenaline rush, and maybe some dopamine or maybe some bitter fruit to eat, whatever it was. It was there every day. You had some kind of risk and reward, and so that's a very different rhythm to writing a book. A book is much more delayed. It's the long game. Every little bit contributes to it, but there isn't that same sort of daily payoff at all. You almost have to create it artificially to make it work, I think, for people like me. But for me, it's still very challenging. It's a different format. I think I've said before to people who ask me about it, I think the structure of a book is so important. All the time you spend on the front end trying to plan it, laying out the architecture of it is time very well spent, because if you have a fault or a failing in your structure, it'll show up in that long form in a way it probably won't in a newspaper article when you're trying to get in and get out and get the news out. So honestly, I'm not at all feeling like I'm a pro at it yet. I'm learning as I go. But this one was a little bit, I was trying to make it different than the Federer book. I think I succeeded, and so it wouldn't be just a rinse and repeat. But I feel like the thing that's interesting about it is when I wrote The Master, that came out, the first edition of that came out in 2021, so it's been 3 years. And people still, will, on almost not a daily basis anymore, but pretty frequently will get back with you and say, hey, I'm reading it, or don't like this, or I do like this, but the reaction and the feedback is still there. So you can see that has just a longer tail, so much longer tail than a newspaper article or a magazine article. And that's very rewarding, I think. And these guys, for better or worse, they totally deserve it. They changed sport, they changed tennis. And I'm feel very fortunate to be able to have been there for all of it and to be able to write about it in depth now.
And with your book on Rafa Nadal in mind, and recently he played his last matches as a professional in Malaga in the Davis Cup. It was an event that you were watching every second of. There is so much to talk about, but I would like to start there. And also because this is the Roland-Garros podcast and he won 14 titles at Roland-Garros. And before we talk about the man himself, have a listen to Rafa Nadal speaking about how he would like to be remembered.
From a small village in Mallorca that I had the luck that I had my uncle that was a tennis coach in my village when I was a very, very small kid, and I had a great family that had the chance to support me in every single moment. No, just a kid that follow their dreams, worked as hard as possible to be where I am today. And at the end of the day, being honest, a lot of people work hard, a lot of people tries their best every single day, but I am one of these that I have been very lucky that the life gave me the opportunity to live unforgettable experiences because of tennis. No, so I just want to be remembered as a good person and a kid that follow their dreams and achieved more than what I ever dreamed.
That was Rafa Nadal speaking at the Davis Cup, where he's representing Spain in Malaga. It was an emotional time. Chris, it's been an emotional time since he confirmed when he'd stopped playing. But taking you back to the beginning, what are your first memories of watching Rafa Nadal?
Well, it's funny enough. I mean, because his legacy for certainly will be the 14 Roland-Garros, is no question. But I first saw him play on grass. I saw him play on back courts at Wimbledon, and he was practicing. I'd heard about him. I had figured out that he didn't have a one-handed backhand, which was the first thing I wrote about him, which was wrong. He did have a two-hander, and I went out to the court to watch him. It was a beautiful day before the tournament began. Tony was out there watching as well, and he looked like he was about 25 years old, 26 years old from a distance. He had this incredible energy and this physicality to him, and just was, as you would imagine, diving into the corners and skidding and just playing with enormous brio and enthusiasm. And then when he got up close and I talked to him afterward, he didn't speak more than a few words of English at that point. So it was in my rudimentary Spanish, but definitely you could tell he was 17 years old then when he got up close, the chubby cheeks, a little bit of teenage acne and just the whole thing. And he was just, I would say quite shy, totally unshy on the court. Anything that related to what he was doing with a tennis ball, hitting the tennis ball, was just exuberance and confidence and intimidation, really. But off the court, very mild mannered. So that dichotomy was there from the very beginning. And I think obviously he became less shy and less timid as time went on. But I'll never forget that. And also just that amazing disparity. I mean, people use the term man-child, and I think that did apply to Rafa in a lot of ways.
There was that wonderful story that Pat Cash told about when Rafa stepped in at an exhibition and he beat Pat. And afterwards he kept saying to him, no, he's really good. No, I promise you, he's really good and he's going to be very good. And he turned out to be. But how would you say that Nadal, for you, Chris, the sport that you follow, the sport that you love, how do you feel he has changed the sport of tennis?
That's a great question. And that's someone I asked a lot when I've been researching the book. And I did go into it in quite a lot of detail. What I would say is that I think, technically, I think what he changed was just the use of topspin and power together on the forehand side in particular. You can't say he's unique in that. Roger did the same thing at the same time, but they both with that forehand and that straight armed strike have really pushed that technique in a different direction and really popularized it. And then Rafa's return positions as well, how far back he went in the court, which seemed very counterintuitive to a lot of people, me included. What is he doing? Why can't they ace him all the time? But he was very wise, very smart, knew his strengths and weaknesses, and knew his opponent's ability to take advantage of it or not, and it worked for him very well. And you see more and more players doing that, and I think that'll be I would say, at least semi-permanent change on the tour in terms of how people adjust to that. But really, more with Rafa, I'd say it's about the ethos, PG, and how he approached the mental aspects of the game. I don't think he's the first, but I think his approach to it, where it wasn't so much about winning the match as it was about kind of improving and getting the best out of himself and finding a way to really have a perpetual cycle there. That's a very compelling mentality, and I think he was somebody who definitely popularized that, and that's had a lot of impact across many, many generations of tennis, and will continue to, I think.
His body had the final say. It could continue no more. But are you surprised he played for as long as he did? Because I remember saying when he was in his mid-20s that it'd be lucky if he got to 28 with the knees, and we heard about the injections and just the way and how physically he was when he played the game.
Yeah, sure. Go back to Agassi in his early 20s saying, he's writing checks his body may not be able to cash was the famous quote. And a lot of us who'd followed the game, especially in recent times, it's interesting because you think about it, what are we looking at when Rafa arrives on the scene? We're looking at a generation before where, Pete Sampras and Stefan Edberg and Boris Becker and all those players retired pretty much around 30, and they were done and they gave it all. And then the new generation took over. Agassi was starting to change that a little bit by pushing on, but Roger was already in position to take over there and become the dominant player. So even if Andre was enduring, he was not necessarily dominating anymore into his mid 30s. So it was definitely seemed logical to us the way he played, and there have been other players who were kind of grinders and really aggressive movers that just didn't hold up. So it seemed like something that made sense to all of us to see him with the surface changes and just the length of the points that it wasn't going to happen. But it's an incredible testimony to his spirit, really, and his willingness to fight through pain on a daily basis. I'm not sure I'd recommend it to the youth of the world. I don't know. You have kids of your own. I'm sure it's probably not what you want to show them, but it does show an amazing fortitude. And I think love of the process and love of the game, which is very admirable. And you just can't do that repeatedly as he's done with the foot injury, the knee injuries, the knee problems, if you don't have something about the process that just pulls you in. And he truly is a beast of a competitor. And there are many great competitors in sports, many great competitors in tennis, but I think Rafa is a cut above.
Spain didn't get the fairy tale ending they wanted at the Davis Cup. Were you surprised or not that that's where he chose to finish his career? And then were you surprised that you saw him in the singles?
I think it was kind of what was the best option available. Ultimately, Gigi, I think based on what he had on the table, I knew in the start of the season that if he was going to play the whole year, that he did have Davis Cup in his sights. I think he initially wanted to play in the sort of the semifinal round, if you will, earlier in September, which was also in Spain. I think it was in Valencia. So I think he had that on his radar from all the way through the season. But then everything really went haywire for him. It just didn't work out as planned at all. Australia looked pretty good early on when he got there. Couldn't play really. Couldn't end up playing Monte Carlo, where he wanted to go and sort of say farewell. Huge tournament for him. All those double-digit titles there. So I think he wanted to go to Indian Wells. He's very close to the owner, Larry Ellison. Stays with him when he's there. Couldn't do that. He was there on site. Couldn't let himself play. So there was a lot of disappointment and a lot of changes along the way. So I think he was grabbing for the thing that was most meaningful by the end when he realized he didn't want to continue. And I think even around French Open time, when he played Zverev and lost in the first round, I think he was thinking, you know what, I'm improving here. This is feeling better. Maybe I'll go again in 2025. So it was a moving target. I think once it became clear to him that he was going to make an end to it in 2024, Davis Cup was the most symbolic and the best option available to him. Didn't work out like he planned, but he's a realist. So I guess in a way, for a realist, he could handle that ultimately better than guys who probably create castles in their head.
And 14 Roland-Garros titles. Will we ever see the likes again?
I really hesitate to say never, because it just, we thought when Pete Sampras had 14 Grand Slam singles titles total, that seemed beatable, but not anywhere near as soon as it happened, and not by three different guys. So, I mean, I don't think you could ever say never. And also, look what we've seen in the last decade or so with the longevity of athletes and their ability to prosper and do well into their even early 40s. So who knows what the human timeline is going to look like 15, 20 years down the line. Maybe these people's careers will be 30 years. Maybe they'll find a way with regenerative joints and things like that to be able to play on longer. Who knows? So I wouldn't say that. But I think if knowing what we know now and the situation as it is, it looks pretty unbreakable. And whatever happens, it's an incredibly impressive thing based on what he did in the time that he did it.
Close to him, don't see him getting it, is Novak Djokovic with 10 Australian Opens. And I had planned to move on to Jannik Sinner, but Novak Djokovic keeping himself in the conversation. There was, this has been my least successful year, but he wins Olympic gold. You feel it was that final piece of the puzzle. And then I don't know if you were as surprised as it seems everybody else. He announces that his new coach, at least for the start of 2025, will be Andy Murray.
Yeah, I mean, best victory in some ways, winning the gold, and best off-season story by hiring Andy Murray. I think Andy's having fun, surprising everybody. He always has. He's always loved that part of it, and to some degree, Novak has as well. It does make a tremendous amount of sense when you think about it. I mean, Novak, what's he playing for? He's playing for the big tournaments. He's playing for new sensations, and you look at the arc of his career and people he's brought in all along. He's always sort of tapped into smart, high-level tennis players. He was working with Lubicic when he was working with Ricardo Piatti. He brought in Agassi for a while. He's had Todd Martin come work with him before. These are pretty cerebral people in a lot of ways. And Andy's a smart guy, knows a lot about tennis. And at one point in their careers early on, they were quite close. Those days when they played doubles together, and then their early years on the junior circuits and playing in Les Petites As, which is the under 14 tournament in France. Definitely a lot of connections there in the past. And I think some ways this is a way for them to kind of restoke that and tap back into that again. And it shows how much respect Novak has for Andy's tennis knowledge, and also shows that, Andy might look miserable on the court, but he must be a lot of fun off the court if Novak wants to hire him for a, part-time coach at least.
And people were wondering why. I think most people expected Murray to go into coaching, but why didn't he take more time? Maybe have one Christmas at home. But you feel, Chris, that with Djokovic, this is short term in the sense he wants 25. He wants Grand Slam title 25. Then he's got all the records. He's got everything. And I don't know how far you see him going through 2025, but it feels like it was a one-time offer. Look, Andy, this is what I want to get. Maybe it's one of the best places for him to try and get it. And then who knows what will happen from there.
That makes some sense. Yeah, I don't know if Novak's got a clear timeline in his head. He's somebody who is always looking for the incremental improvement, always looking for a new approach, a new mentality. And I think as long as those are available to him and he can go out and compete with these people, he'll be tempted to keep going. Look, and also with Yannick Sinner's situation, being a little bit up in the air with what happens to him, whether he does get suspended or not. Alcaraz has certainly not been a 12-month or 11-month of the year force yet in his career. He's been amazing in spurts. So Novak, I'm sure, sees some opportunities still and knows on the hard courts that he's still pretty close to top of class. So there is certainly an opportunity. He's right about that. I don't know. I mean, his kids have been at an age where it's tough to travel for quite a while. And I went and interviewed him 4 or 5 years ago in Monte Carlo, and you could tell he was having a hard time with that tension between family and the tour, and he has scaled back a bit. But I don't think in medium term or long term, based on what I've seen over the years, that you can be competitive at the highest level as a part-time player for very long. So if he thinks he can kind of show up at the majors and grab a major, he kind of did that at the Olympics a little bit, but he also had put in the time at Roland-Garros before he got hurt, and then he went to Wimbledon, made it to the final. So he had the miles in the body before he got that great result. So I just don't see him being able to show up just for the big stuff and compete against these guys who are so good, so young, going to be a little quicker than he is and hungry. So I think he's going to have to probably commit to it a little bit more if he wants to have the results that he's used to. And that means probably he won't be going a whole lot longer.
How do you think Murray will cope with being yelled at in the box if indeed Novak Djokovic does yell at him?
I think he'd be quite amused by it, actually. I think Andy has that ability to kind of look at that side of things and see the light side of it and the irony of it, right? I think there's a lot of irony in this whole thing.
If Novak Djokovic is going to win 25, the chances are he'll have to get through one of Carlos Alcaraz or Yannick Sinner. And starting with Yannick Sinner, I mean, the numbers are phenomenal. 8 titles. He's 23, year-end number 1, just 6 defeats this year in which he won a set in all of those 6 defeats. I mean, Chris, it's truly incredible what Yannick Sinner achieved on the court.
It is. And then you think about the things that were going on off the court for a big chunk of the season with that sort of hanging over his head and being able to create that kind of focused, very, very low margin for error tennis that he plays, very low clearance of the net, balls taken very quickly off the bounce with very compact but powerful cuts. So I think that's not a lot of margin there for not feeling confident, not being sure about what you're doing. So that says a lot about his mental strength and maturity to be able to play as well as he did despite the circumstances. But yeah, I think it's probably, I mean, it's not one of the greatest seasons of the Open era for men. There've been so many great ones, but it's certainly a top 15 or top 20 season, which is quite something considering the players we're talking about. And that winning percentage, basically, the gold standard, I think Gigi is 90% or better, right? For a winning percentage for the year. And he hit it. So that's pretty rare company. I mean, Rafa only did it once, I believe, maybe twice with a very partial season. Roger was greatest years he did it. Novak's done it a couple times as well. So, but it's rare company and it is deserved. And his game is, I wouldn't say it strikes you right away as a new paradigm, but then the more you talk to the players that are facing it, it does feel that way because it's just so suffocating. The pace is so tremendous, and there's just no room to breathe when you play him when he's playing well on a hard court, especially. And I think he could also translate it to clay as well. I think it's going to be if he's able to stay healthy and He's got tremendous, tremendous ball striking skills, and he seems like he's got that gene for improvement as well, able to really keep pushing himself and finding new ways. And he's got a great coach in his corner in Darren Cahill.
And you touched on his mental strength, everything going on with the failed drug test off the court, and it is still something that's ongoing. Have a little listen to his Davis Cup teammate, Matteo Berrettini. They retained the Davis Cup title. Berrettini played his part, but was asked in one of the press conferences about Jannik Sinner.
I'm going to be honest, last year, when we were here, we were looking in each other's eyes and we were like, this guy is something else, something different. And I never saw, everybody was saying, we never ever saw someone hitting the ball so hard, so flat, and so many times in. And it looked like he couldn't miss. So since then, I think he lost 6 matches. So I think he just proved that he's the best in the world. And as you can see, he's the most humble guy on the planet. And he came here like he didn't win the ATP Tour finals. He didn't win everything that he won. He came here. He showed so much respect for the team. Before we step on court on doubles, he wanted to check with everybody that was okay, our decision, and I think this is special. This is something that you have in your heart. And obviously the tennis is impressive, but I think the way he manages everything off court and the relationship between people is what makes him special and why we have 2 of these now back in Italy.
And Chris, it's as you touched on and Berrettini touched on, yes, the tennis is impressive, but I think what has stood out for everybody with everything he's gone through with the failed tests was emotionally and mentally how he's been able to compartmentalize and still achieve the heights he has done on the tennis court.
Yeah, he showed some signs of nerves early in his career. There's some matches that he should have won, that against Alcaraz in particular, some big points that he didn't convert. Probably, again, that low margin for error there is in his game that Berrettini referenced there, with this hitting so flat, so hard, so close to the net. But I think he's really developed a lot of confidence in his physicality and also in his sort of technique shifts that he's made. And he's also serving better. I mean, he's changed the serve a lot. He's fiddled with the way he hits it with the pinpoint versus the platform, when you bring your feet together after you toss the ball or you don't. He's gone different directions with that, but I think he's found a great serving rhythm. And his returning is I think potentially Djokovician, Murrayan, Agassian levels in terms of how he's doing it. I would say, however, personally, just as an outsider, having watched a lot of these guys, and I don't know how you feel about this, but he doesn't really have the off-court charisma that some great champions in the past have had. Could he develop it? He's got a lot to him, I think. Obviously, his multicultural background is quite interesting and all that, and being in that spotlight will change you. I worry that what's happened with the doping situation, and that could set him back and really make him much more guarded for a long time. But he's not somebody who really moves a needle in terms of his personality. So I think you need an Alcaraz to be the counterpoint to that for men's tennis in particular. But his game also, it's not, Djokovic was difficult in a way because it was almost so amazing that it looked boring, because everything looked like he was very balanced and in spot. When you watched him live, you'd realize it, or you'd talk to the opponents. And Yannick's a little bit that way too. I mean, I don't think on TV it necessarily comes through just how difficult it is to do what he does. But I do hope he'll come out of his shell a little bit, and I think it's a competitive sports landscape, as we both know. And I hope that if he's not the one with his charisma who moves the needle, that they're going to be players like an Alcaraz or I love Berrettini, but I don't think he'll ever be top 3 in the world. But he's got a great personality, and there are a bunch of those in tennis.
Yeah, I do feel with Jannik Sinner, I agree on everything you've said, and I spend a lot of time telling people, but he's a really nice guy. He says hello and goodbye. In Miami, he said happy Easter. He hit me with a ball in practice. He apologized. He's a lovely, lovely young man, and that's what I keep telling everyone. But he's a good guy, and he's a lovely man. But in terms of the charisma, where he walks around the court, it's the same. It doesn't set you on fire, but what does set you on fire is when he comes up against a Carlos Alcaraz, and the way they bring out the best in each other is phenomenal. And you get the smile of Alcaraz. But as you touched on earlier, you also said with Alcaraz, you're not getting a full year. You get these bursts. I mean, for me, seeing him in Turin at the Tour Finals, I think the motherly side of me, I just wanted him to stop. And he's just played an exhibition with Ben Sheldon, Madison Square Gardens. I want him to put the racket down for a day. I know he's making hay while sun shines. A lot of people rely on him, and he is who he is. But I don't know about you, Chris. I just think scheduling wise, I just want him to just stop for a little bit.
Yeah, it is. It's surprising because people that are around him, both his agent with IMG and then obviously Juan Carlos Ferrero, these are not their first rodeo by any means, and they know the pitfalls. And Ferrero himself, I think, suffered during his career. He was a very ephemeral number one, and could have achieved more. But I think he made some decisions, partly because of patriotism with Davis Cup and trying to juggle it when Davis Cup was longer form and really draining. And he, at his peak, really committed to things that maybe he would have probably been smarter to scale back on. And I believe it's right. I mean, Carlos, he's full of energy and charisma, and my gosh, everybody wants to see him. But I mean, exhibition list is pretty long for sure. He'll tell you it's not the same kind of stress, but still, you got to make the move, do the travel, shake the hands, go out and put the energy into it. Not the same level of stress, but your body is still a little bit at risk. So I do hope that they're smart about it. It looks like they're overdoing it to me, and I think that this is a kind of talent who could have an incredibly long run. Talk to Rafa about him, and everybody knows what a special player he is, and he just jumps off the screen at you. But it's sunny a lot of the time in Spain, so there's plenty of time to make some hay.
It certainly, and it's incredible the season he did have, winning Roland-Garros and then Wimbledon. But you feel back at Roland-Garros, that Olympic final, the silver medal, the losing to Djokovic, crying when he was speaking to Alex Corretja in his interview. It felt maybe that took more of a toll on him than maybe we thought.
Oh, for sure. No, I think also that sort of double being able to French Open, Wimbledon, and then go to that. Just those three things. That's almost a full season right there in terms of effort and emotional investment. And he does put a lot into it. And I remember talking to him when he was. I went down to Alicante, to Vienna, where the academy is, Ferrero's academy, for a New York Times story before he really broke out. And I spent a couple of days down there watching him. And it was interesting because you could just see a lot of their practice sessions with Ferrero. He was training with a couple of guys his age as well. He was just so exuberant and so full of positive energy and just sort of laughing off his mistakes and laughing at somebody's ridiculous winner they just hit against him. And that's just the way he is. And I think that's when he's happiest. So whenever you see his energy start to emotionally flag, or the face becomes a bit of a mask, or you see him getting a little downtrodden, that's a sign that he needs to scale it back. And he may be the kind of guy that is going to require, less will be more for him, I think. And he'll tell you, he was somebody who was hard on himself when he was young. He was somebody who tossed a lot of rackets, had a lot of explosions and volatility to him. And his solution was to be happy on the court and emphasize those moments and let out the emotions. Quite different than a Federer, if you recall. Roger was similar when he was young, and he chose the route of the mask and changing his personality radically on the court, and that worked for him. But I don't think Carlos can do that.
Something I wanted to put into the mix here, sort of end of year mix. He's older, he's 27, Sasha Zverev, 2 titles, Rome and then in Bercy, which his brother Misha told us in Turin that he used Bercy as a practice week, and he won that practice week. But he's someone who said he believes he has to change how he plays if he's going to compete on a level. And apparently his team post-US Open sat down and said, right, we have to make changes. He has to be more aggressive. He has to step inside the court. But and he finishes at number 2, where does Zverev sit for you in terms of moving forward and contending?
Yeah, I don't think he has. I think top drawer center, top drawer Alcaraz are still a cut above Zverev. Clay is interesting, with what he's able to do on that surface. But I do think there's that sort of hardwired defensive mentality he has on the biggest points. And he's been hearing it for a long time, and he hasn't really been able to meaningfully change it to the point that he needs to yet. Doesn't mean it's too late, but it's a hard thing to adjust. He's more inclined to want you to miss than hit the winner on those biggest points. You did see sometimes when you watch some of his matches a couple times this year where I did notice a bit of a change, where he was really starting to go for using that backhand, which is such a weapon, and taking it from positions in the court where he didn't go for winners before, and he would be able to do that. Misha, his brother, was a great volleyer and has been working on Sasha's volleys probably since birth. He's got improvement there. He's improved a lot for sure if you look at the way he was volleying 10 years ago. But yeah, I think if he were able to get another 10, 15% better and maybe pick his spots just a little bit better, that could be another difference. I mean, we're talking about from where he's at to major champion. I mean, we saw this year at the French Open. I'm talking about probably 4 or 5 points in the match against Alcaraz that made the difference. So he's able to adjust those things they're talking about. The serve has become a monster weapon, and I think the second serve could be a little bit better as well potentially. But a lot of things are starting to get optimized. But I think ultimately it's that sort of fine line between aggression and defense that'll be the key thing for him to try to address.
Before we wrap up the ATP, is there anybody you would like to give, any player, an honourable mention to? And it could be for what they did or for something else, or maybe there isn't anyone, but is there one person or one thing that you would like to throw in for the ATP's year?
Not to be parochial, but I have to give Taylor Fritz, a shout out. I mean, he's hardly an unknown quantity at number 4 in the world at the end of the year, but there's been so much negativity about American men's tennis for a long time, or not even negativity, apathy in a lot of ways about it. My culture in particular is very tough. Either you're winning big titles or you're not really existing on the radar in the U.S. system. And Taylor's not a big star in the U.S., but I think he's shown a lot of grit, and a U.S. Open final and winning that match against Tiafoe in the semis against another American. He's beating Zverev in a bunch of big matches this year. I think he's improved steadily throughout his career. He comes from a lot of affluence, not necessarily a guy who has to fight to survive in life by any means, but he's somebody who shows a lot of day in, day out commitment, and I think he's come a long way, and credit to him.
Moving towards the WTA, who would or did get your vote for Player of the Year and why?
I mean, for me, I think it was Sabalenka for sure, just based on those 2 slam wins and being able to lift her game and win a lot of the big matches. I think for me it was pretty clear cut. Iga had her moments, and I think Coco Gauff showed some great tennis intermittently and obviously finished very strong. But it was Sabalenka's year.
It's so wonderful, Chris, to watch her play. She's happy off the court, and people say at work, at play, if you're happy away from it, you're happy on it. And it's radiating across Sabalenka. And also to that, she's adding bits to her game. She's still evolving as a player.
But she does have this tremendous extroverted, charismatic, just loves to that belly laugh kind of energy to her, and that is really it's great. You kind of don't take her seriously sometimes, and you really should, because the game is all business, boy. I'll tell you that. And she is a fighter, and I definitely see some improvements in her game in terms of the all court aspect of it. I really feel she understands now when and how to take advantage of her huge shots more than she used to. She used to miss opportunities. You'd see a hesitation after a shot that would open up a breach in the defense and might come in a step too late. Now she really gets it. She understands when that opening is there, and she's able to come forward and finish with the swing volley as a fine overhead. And full credit as somebody on a very, I don't like to get personal for your listeners, but I'm a college level tennis player. I struggled with my second serve and double faulting and the yips. I know how hard it is for anybody to overcome that, especially with a stadium of 15,000 watching you and millions more watching on television. And so full credit to her to have been able to overcome that thing a couple of years ago. It appeared that it might be debilitating, and here she is at number 1 and slapping aces on big points. So, yeah.
Best player in the world on a hard court. You had tipped her to win Wimbledon if she hadn't had the shoulder problem. So what do you make of the statement? She was speaking to us pre-WTA finals when she said that she likes elongated points and she would actually like the clay season to be longer so she could play more on clay courts.
That is surprising, because I'm not sure she's wired to get that wish to come true, honestly. But you do see that she loves to dig into the rallies. When she and Swiatek in particular, in those great finals they played sort of mid-season, you could see that there was this, who's going to crack first, and a bit like Sinner. I mean, you'd think Sabalenka's technique and her go for it style would create difficulties for her in longer rallies, but she does seem to thrive. She's able to now, with her physical fitness being at a higher level, her body positions are better. She's able to get her weight where it needs to go. It is sustainable in a way that it didn't used to be. Iga would be that way because of the topspin on the forehand side and the movement and just the margin for error that she has built into her game. But Sabalenka, her body and her footwork and everything has to be just right for that platform to work, but she's gotten there.
Well, let's chat Iga, the news came close season that she had failed a drugs test earlier on the back end of the season, a contaminated supplement. It was melatonin she was taking for the jet lag. She was cleared. She says she said herself it was a symbolic ban. But up to that point, how had you seen her season? Yes, she won Roland-Garros. She didn't get the gold at the Olympics. She changed up her team. So how would you look back on 2024 for Iga Świątek?
Yeah, I don't think I don't think it was what she would have hoped for, honestly. I mean, I don't know what she would tell you. But as an outsider, I think in a way she underperformed. I think Roland Garros was hers in the Olympics, especially for the taking. And I know how much it mattered to her. And however they set up her season, admittedly, it is difficult to make that transition from clay to grass back to clay. It's so rare that it happens in the course of normal seasons. But she's a planner. Her team was planning, and ultimately they didn't get it done. And she just didn't look like she was in the right place mentally during the Olympics as it went on. A lot of pressure. But to me, I think if she would have taken one title this year, that would have been the one she would have wanted. So it's hard to call her season a thunderous success. And I think obviously there were some things happening behind the scenes later on that explain some of the results. But she still seems like she's not able to transition her game surface to surface as some great champions of the past have been able to. I think she has it in her. What a tremendous athlete she is, and what a hard worker she is. But the grass obviously is still an issue with the technique on the forehand side. Now, you could say if Rafa Nadal can win Wimbledon, she should be able to as well. I would agree with that, but I don't think she believes it in her head yet. So I'd say for Iga, despite the French Open win and a lot of other good results, particularly in the front half of the season, I'd say it was kind of a B season for her.
She goes into 2025 with Wim Fissette by her side. Coco Gauff also changed things up on the coaching team at the back end of the season. And she's had a season of ups and downs. But again, Chris, when you think how young she still is, I think the one thing that continues to amaze me about her is her mental strength, because she has a lot thrown at her, a lot to deal with, but she's able to ride her way through it.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I know that her dad was feeling at the U.S. Open when things didn't go well in the title defense there that she should shut down her season and just sort of call it a year and just sort of regroup, go back and work on some things technically and that she needed to, especially the forehand again, and just get that right and then come back in 2025. She did not do that. She hired a new coach. She really shook things up, and she showed a lot of resilience and fortitude, and she played on with great success. So interesting to know that backstory and see what she was able to achieve, and I think that'll give her some strength going forward. I was really surprised, Gigi. I thought she would have a great season after winning the U.S. Open in 23. I thought that was going to be really her year in many ways, and it seemed like she had solved a lot of issues, but it just didn't happen for her. I think she did feel some of the pressure. She is a one-woman corporation in a lot of ways. You could almost say it's too much too soon. I mean, she got all the sponsors and all the money. I mean, it's kind of a Raducanu type of story there in some ways. How do you manage that when you're already a superstar without that great result? But she did get that result at the U.S. Open in 23. So, there's substance to the style. I still feel like with that ability to move, the resources that she has available, sort of the training of the champion's mind that she's gone through with her father and other coaches through the years, I think there's tremendous upside there. There are technical issues still, but we've seen her under pressure hit that forehand now enough times in big matches that she'll win plenty more. Is she going to be a Serena type player? No, I don't think so. But she's somebody who's going to win, I think, a few more majors for sure.
And someone else who's using her platform, she's a superstar where she comes from, is Zheng Qinwen. She won the gold medal at the Olympics. She had fans flying in from across the world to watch her play. She even apologized to some of her Chinese fans in Riyadh for swearing because she was so stressed during a particular match. I mean, she has I wouldn't want to mess with her. She has a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed her for the first time. That first year, she kind of broke through at the French Open. I think she lost to Iga. I think it was fourth round. Am I right? Yeah, it was about 21. I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And her English was really rudimentary. Her agent brought her out, and we did an interview for the New York Times. And she was funny because you could just tell how much confidence that she had. She was just, even though she was didn't have the words, she had the desire to communicate all these stories and all these ambitions that she had. And she was basically just fearless in the interview. And she was getting up and she was mocking her agent and sort of mocking me by the end, the whole thing. And you could just, not in an aggressive way, but in a very playful way. So that to me was very telling, that she had that sort of sense of self and confidence in herself. And I'm not surprised to see her embrace these big moments as she has in recent years because of that. She's I still think she's a raw talent in many ways. I don't think she's fully put her game together. She's somebody who's still learning the game, understanding the angles and the geometry of the court. And there's still a mechanical quality to her tennis, Gigi, I would say. Seems like sometimes she's hitting the shots by rote instead of by instinct sometimes. I think as she gets more and more comfortable with that, she'll find more room for expression. But I'm a little intrigued just because there seems to be an edge in the locker room with her, and I'd love to know a bit more about that. I can't say I fully understand why, but pretty mild-mannered, intelligent people like Emma Navarro from the U.S. obviously had a strong reaction to Zheng during the Olympics and sort of didn't like the way she was being treated. Danielle Collins definitely more volatile herself. That one seems like more of a fair fight, but Emma Navarro, that to me tells me there's something else that's going on there dynamic-wise that when you said you don't want to mess with her, maybe that's what it's about. It's definitely a sense of destiny to Zheng and her attitude toward the game.
A couple of other names you threw in there. So is there someone you'd like to give, and we haven't even mentioned Jasmine Paolini, but an honourable mention on the WTA side?
Well, I'd say two. Emma Navarro for sure, from the U.S. Came a tremendously long way in the last couple of years. We've had a lot of great college players from the U.S. Who've gone on to have good careers, obviously Danielle Collins being one of them. I don't think a lot of people would have picked Emma necessarily as a sure thing, just based on, not sure they saw the athleticism and the movement there, not sure they saw maybe the level of power required. But boy, I think she could, if she stays healthy and manages everything well, I think she's got a game that can be dangerous on so many surfaces. Subtle game, but also has the power when she needs it. Can beat you all kinds of different ways and has a great match temperament for sure. Able to really, really stay cool and calm under pressure. And that big win over Coco at the U.S. Open was one of the big examples. So she was definitely one to watch this year and beyond. And also another college tennis connection, Diana Schneider, who finished just outside the top 10 very quietly because had a lot of her best results in 250s and smaller events. But this is a left-handed player of great ability and still very, very young. I think still 20, if I'm not mistaken, and has come through a lot to get to where she is. Came from a pretty tough economic background, had to fight through a lot of satellites without many resources and do a lot of things on her own, has a tremendous maturity, and has basically just skyrocketed up the rankings. So big watch out for her in 2025.
What a year 2024 has been. Finally, if you could make one prediction for 2025, what would it be?
Oh, Gigi, I hate when you do this to me. My book will be published. That's my prediction. And I say that with great relief. No, I think great prediction.
Is Djokovic going to get 25? Is Sasha Zverev going to win a Grand Slam title? Is Naomi Osaka going to come back and add to her tally? What one thing could you see happening?
I do feel pretty confident that Coco Gauff's going to win a major. I mean, that's not a huge prediction, but I think it's important for tennis and important for tennis in my country in particular that she does sustain what she's done because she has built up this great image and brand and fan base that you described globally, but also in the U.S. And the U.S. really needs a tennis star, and she is the best candidate by far. So I think she will win another major. I know she'd love to win Roland-Garros. That's probably the one, Wimbledon or Roland-Garros, but Roland-Garros is one she feels a connection with, and she's been preparing with her French lessons for the victory speech someday if it happens in singles. So, yeah, I think I'd say that pretty comfortably.
Okay, no, that's a lovely prediction, and also the prediction your book will be published, and we look forward to reading it.
That one I think is pretty safe. But I'm much better at analyzing than I am predicting, Gigi. I don't know about you.
No. So my predictions are horrendous. But Chris, we really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
All the best to you, Gigi. Great respect. Thank you.
So that's it from Courtside Conversations for this year. Thank you so much for your company, which we do look forward to having again when we return in 2025. Until then, have a great Christmas and New Year. We'll see you next time.